Everyone, great to see you. My guest today is the wonderful Carolyn Davis, saxophonist, composer, band leader, artist, advocate, and a great person. Great to talk to her. If you've ever been interested in monophonic polypulses, you've come to the right place. But not just that. We talk about a whole host of other things, and it was great to talk to her. Thank you, Caroline, for your time. Thank you for tuning in and dropping by. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. I will see you at the end. Bye.
Yes, it's funny. Yeah, I just recorded yet another album, though, after that. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but yeah, in December we recorded Portals Volume 2, and this volume will feature a bunch of vocalists, a handful of vocalists that I really enjoy listening to.
Did you write the lyrics?
Yeah, I did. Most of them most of the record is dedicated to my grandmother, who was a poet. She became a poet later in her life, maybe around age 60. Like she was older, maybe 50. And it was, she was published, but it was like, it wasn't like paying bills and things like that. Yeah, the record is dedicated. The whole Portals concept came about because my dad died, and I was looking for a way to connect with him through the writing process. And so that's been sort of my journey for creating these like windows to connect with my ancestors.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So, and this one is kind of connecting to your grandmother more?
Yeah, to the same side of the family. So my dad's mom, who was a poet. And so some of the lyrics that I wrote, I didn't use her poetry for the lyrics because there's something weird about that for me. It's like for me, it's rhythmically like mismatched. So I wrote two songs with lyrics, and then there's one piece that's with the poetry, but it's through composed around the poetry, more like a spoken word kind of. And then there's two pieces that are sort of based on the rhythms of her poems, featuring an MC who's not saying my grandmother's poems, but like made up their own verse.
How do you go about writing lyrics? Like, what does that look like for you?
I feel like it varies. Sometimes I go through these really spurts of inspiration, and a lot of it has to do with what I'm reading, and so I'll be inspired by something I'm reading. So maybe it comes from like automatopoeia, something where I'm like writing down certain words that are occurring over and over again, or ideas that I'm going through. Like I was really struggling and researching the idea of fame recently. So like looking at the poetry that people have written about fame. Like there's an Emily Dickinson quote about like fame is a fickle beast, or fame is a fickle bitch, or something like this. Like, yeah, that's true. So I recently put the word fickle in one of my songs that I recorded recently, which is the more recent album I recorded with Wendy Eisenberg. We just recorded a duo album together.
Oh, okay.
There are 5 songs with lyrics on that album.
And you're singing on that one?
I'm singing on that one. Wendy's singing on that one. And we both wrote the music. There's, these 5 pieces with lyrics, and then 3 pieces with no lyrics, instrumental. And there's a bit of improvising too.
I was interested in, you use different compositional techniques, and that's something that's really interesting to me. You were talking about like one technique of writing things on Post-it notes and then grabbing from those. Are there other techniques that you use? Like, do you vary it up? How does that work for you?
Kind of going back to the lyric. One technique is like putting in words that I've learned from, either people who are directly my mentors or people who I consider mentors. Like Emily Dickinson would be a mentor to me. So I'm sort of calling upon my ancestors, or calling upon the people who have influenced me in my work. So that's like a technique that I like to do a lot, but it's like an Easter egg or something like that, where I wrote another song about fame also, the one of them that's featured on the Portals album, and then there's another one that I recorded with Wendy. It's some bit of a topic that I like to think about a lot, apparently.
Fame?
Yeah, just like, or just the concept of, you know, like the ups and downs of being a musician or any kind of artist, where you put your work out there and then people talk about it, and then you have this little moment, and then you go back down to like your work, which is really the more meaningful part of everything. But anyway, that's one technique that I like to do, is like put in some Easter eggs for people who've really influenced me. And it might be like a word, it might be a rhythm that I've learned from someone. Like Von Freeman, I there's a lot of slidey material that I've put in things because of him and his influence to me. So those kind of like Easter eggs, are those like ways to pay honor, or to honor the people who have influenced me, is like a technique that I like to use a lot. Other compositional techniques that I've utilized are writing something and then playing it backwards, and that's the composition. That's something I've done before, or using the lyrics backwards instead of forwards. I've done that a lot before. But usually, just to go back again to the lyric thing, I'll have like a placeholder lyric that usually doesn't make it to the end.
Like a, kind of a narrative.
Yeah, like, you know, like Yesterday, the Beatles, when they wrote Yesterday, they used scrambled eggs, you know, like that was the placeholder lyric for that song for a long time. Scrambled eggs.
Oh,
You
I see
know?
what you're saying. Oh, right.
So
you have the melody and maybe the rhythm.
That's
you
right.
just don't have the content.
Yeah, you have placeholder lyrics. Yeah, so that happens a lot to me. I'm trying to think about what I had on this. Yeah,
I've never heard that before. That's
yeah, this song that I wrote with Wendy, I kind of came up with the first phrase, and the first phrase, it's really odd, but it's like flounce garment on a lifeboat, and then the next lyric I had written was my jacket falls to the floor, and it's like pretty like emo and just like you know, the idea of a flounced garment anyway, like this gathered sort of flounced.
Oh, fancy word. All right.
Yeah, so just like this idea of just like a gathered garment, and something that's, you know, harkening back to some time period that we don't exist in anymore.
Yeah.
But anyway, just that whole idea, the drama of that, and then being like, my jacket falls to the floor. It's just too much. Like the drama is too much, so we changed it to, well, yeah, Wendy really helped me out with that one, and we came up with this phrase, I'd never seen that before. And that's the lyric, you know, of the song. So anyway, but it was a placeholder before.
Right. Well, I guess you have kind of two things coming out soon.
I have 3 things coming out soon.
The
other one was recorded a little while ago, and it just took me a minute to get to it and edit it and like mix it. But the third record that's coming out first is this Alula record, which is a follow-up to my recording from 2019.
You mentioned that, yeah.
This record, the 2019 record, is with Matt Mitchell and Greg Saunier, and this one is with Chris Fordini and Val Janti and Taishan Sori.
Wow. Oh, man.
And then
amazing.
Qasim Naqvi is on a couple tracks as well. He's a modular synthesizer.
Are you releasing this on record labels? Are you independently releasing them?
Yeah, I'm going to release all of them on record labels. So I'm talking to some people right now and just trying to figure out what the best option is for me at the moment.
I am curious, and I think people are curious about, like, do we need record labels? Do you feel that you get something out of being on a record label?
I think record labels can help tremendously with distribution. I think that's one major thing. And I think a lot of people are moving towards this idea of subscribership. So then you get the community of people who really care about the music from the standpoint of, oh, we follow this label or we follow this label. We're dedicated listeners, and every person who comes out with an album on this label, we get their album because we're a subscriber. And I think that's really smart.
Yeah.
Then you automatically get a return from your investment with this label. Otherwise, you know, there's a lot of other things that aren't helpful that couldn't be helpful, like, for example, master ownership, or partial master ownership, royalty distribution, splits. And that usually looks like, you know, anywhere from like 60 to 40 or 70 to 30%, you know, in the favor of the artist. It depends on the label. But I think it's really smart to consider all of those things because, you know, you never know what happens with your music. And if you don't own that master, you know, we learn those lessons from like Wayne Shorter and other people like Gigi Christ, who started his own publishing company. And, you know, these people who kind of did it, or Horace Silver for that matter, who's like really smart about it. And his music's been sampled, you know, been sampled by all kinds of beat makers and rappers, or Dorothy Ashby, the harpist. She's like one of the most sampled jazz musicians in the history of the music. Her music has been sampled by, you know, hundreds of MCs and rap artists.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, she was an amazing harpist. But anyway, I think that all of that are things to consider when looking into a label. But I think the most important part is to have a really strong like relationship with the people who own it and the people who are going to be in touch with you. That's like, I think that's the most important part. And the more good that you can feel from that relationship, the clarity and like the sort of like flow that you can feel between you and the record label managers and press people, the better. I think it's important to be able to do a lot of things, you know, and try to sort of touch base with all of those things in a sort of personal way. Unless you really want to just be, well, that's been my strategy. I'll say that. So I like to play solo saxophone, and I have this electronic setup, and I have this project Alula that I utilize my like electronic music chops for, or just more like poppy jazz kind of chops for. And then I have this project Portals, which is more sort of like a modern jazz kind of more that direction of playing, you know, maybe some changes, maybe over like certain forms or something. And then I have some other groups that are more collaborative, where we're all improvising together, or we're structuring our improvisation on the spirit of the moment. So, and then I also do a lot of work for singer-songwriters, where I'm like getting sent a track and I have to, or I've been asked to solo over a section or play flute backgrounds on this area of the song, or sing backup vocals in this area of the song, and I recently played with Jean Rowe, who's a really wonderful singer-songwriter, and I played saxophone and flute and then a bit of synthesizer, and then I sang backup vocals. So there's a lot. I've heard a lot of people say, well, move to New York or move anywhere. It doesn't have to be New York, but move anywhere and just focus on one thing. But I respectfully disagree, because I think there's just so much joy into all these aspects of the playing and all these aspects of the music. And you can see that also like with an artist like Sun Ra. We were talking about him before, but I mean, he wrote lyrics. I feel like there's a song he wrote called, it's like Baby Please or something like that or whatever, and the lyrics are just like, you know, I yearn for a kiss like yours, and just like, wow, Sun Ra wrote lyrics. You know, I mean, we obviously know that because there's lyrics on some of the songs that we all know and love, but I mean, that's, you know, that's like a pop song that he would write or something. Or he was a very well-known arranger, and he arranged thousands of people's music for recordings. You can go and see on Discogs or something where Sun Ra's being given the arranger credit. Like, oh, cool. I mean, like, learn how to arrange, and there's that. You know, he wasn't just a performer. He wasn't just like this eccentric, you know, entity from Saturn. He was also, you know, writing lyrics. He was also writing this like music for a huge orchestra that didn't really make a lot of money, because every time they tried to go to Europe and like do all that, they'd have to pay all these expenses because there's like 20 people in the band or whatever it is. But I think it's really important to be able to like to wear many hats, you know. I think by that, and not to say the phrase like a jack of all trades is a master of none, because I also don't believe that mastership is really possible. I've read a lot of, you know, interviews with musicians, as many of us do, you know, where people talk about the idea of mastering and how that can like nullify, or that can like dull in the mystery, or sort of like dull the magic of something. I just don't. I really dislike that word and the way that it's been used in our history. Obviously, this like tainted American history, the word master. And I just dislike that word, and I don't think we should say like master class anymore. And yeah, all of that kind of thing.
Because we're all students.
Yeah, we're all
always.
students for the rest of life,
Yeah.
you know, and the people who I see and enjoy the most are, you know, those who are still like really trying to learn, like you said.
Like I'm thinking of like interviews with Sonny Rollins.
Yeah.
He's like you feel that he's still a student, like he's still open to learning. It's really inspiring.
It's so inspiring. Yeah, it really truly is. But yeah, so I feel like, you know, the idea of getting into something and like really exploring it is more important to me than getting to a point of like, I'm done with this. Like I'm ready. I'm ready for this, so I'm done. And if I sort of have my hand in all of these places, there's like multiple streams of income coming in, which is also like a very practical approach to living in a place like this, where it's like insanely expensive to just pay for a place to live. Or so yeah, I think that's really important. That's what I would tell a young person. And I think I kind of was made for that, not to be like arrogant about it, but just because my family moved around a lot, I had to like quickly adjust to all these different situations. Like we left Singapore when I was, you know, between 6 and 7, and like moving to Atlanta, which was, you know, we lived in the sort of British community in Singapore because it was a British colony, so like problematic and troublesome, amongst all these like really beautiful and kind Singaporeans, or people who speaking Mandarin and like have a culture of their own, and then moving to Atlanta, where my parents split up and we lived in this sort of like, my mom and I moved to a neighborhood that was, you know, 5% white, and so most of my friends taught me about Black music and Black culture, which was really helpful to me, to approach this music, to approach Black American music. And so then we moved to Texas, to like middle class, like white middle class. And that was different because it was like everyone's listening to Weezer and Green Day and like Hole. And I was like, what? Coming from this other place.
How old were you when you moved?
That was
Texas?
12 years old. And so, yeah, that was a really tough one because I came from this place where everyone's telling me, you should wear these baggy clothes, like wear this FUBU sweater.
Right.
That's not even really for me. Or like my partner bought me this shirt the other day for a gift, which is Janet Jackson. See that picture of Janet Jackson with her breast being held by? Yeah, the one from Vanity Fair, I think. And it's a throwback for me because I went to a Janet Jackson concert with my mom in Atlanta, and I bought that t-shirt, and then I wore it to school, but in Texas. And I was sent home for wearing that shirt because obviously, you know, like nudity or whatever, but I wouldn't have been sent home if I was in Atlanta wearing that shirt. So it's just to give you a sense of what the culture was there. And so when I moved there, my dress was wrong, my accent was wrong, the music I listened to was wrong, and so I kind of had to quickly sort of adjust and again like cast my net into like this new bunch of people, and not to like adjust but to change myself, but like, oh yeah, I'm glad I checked out Green Day and Hole and Weezer. I'm glad I checked them out, you know, I did. Anyway, but yeah, I can see a benefit from like sticking to your guns and doing the one and being real focused on this thing. You know, I can see it.
Well, I think a lot of people, I mean, some people have success that way.
Yeah, and I think that's important too. I think it's just trial by trial, person by person situation. It's not like, oh, this is what you should do. It's like, just listen to yourself and figure out what would be best for you, you know?
Like, I'll just throw this question out, like, what is a good sound for you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's all these physical attributes that go into creating the sound, like learning how to breathe and learning how to shape your mouth around the mouthpiece and like embouchure and all this other stuff. And everyone has an opinion about like double lip embouchure, or like, do you put your lip over the teeth and all this stuff. And I don't really care about it. Honestly, I don't care about any of that stuff. What I do care about is something that I learned from Connie Carruthers, even though she wasn't my teacher. I missed out on studying with her, which I deeply regret. And she was just a huge influence on me. Like, watched every video multiple times. But one thing I learned from listening to her is that I don't think there's much you can do to change your sound because it's your body, especially saxophone, like it's like your mouth, the inside of your mouth cavity. I was thinking about this the other day and how much that can alter and shape the way that saxophone players sound. Is like, what does the inside of your mouth look like, you know? And that into something you can't really change that. I mean, you can like alter the shape of things to
Or
change the quality.
Nasal cavity.
Yeah, the nasal cavity. And like everybody is shaped so differently, you know. I mean, we have the basic structure similar, but the depth of things and like whether like I have a torus on the don't, which is this weird thing where your teeth come up. It's like, it's actually weird looking, but I will spare you and not show you. But your teeth, like you can see the outline of your teeth, my teeth, on the bottom of my bottom of my mouth, like, and you can just see the outline of my teeth under the gums, and it's called a torus. And every time, so when I go to the dentist and get like a X-ray, it pushes in. It really is painful for me because it pushes down. I can feel that on my and I never figured that out until I was complaining so much, and all of the technicians were just like, "What is wrong? You like chill, you know?" And I would just be crying and stuff, and then they figured out, "Oh, you have a torus. Like we have to be really careful to not like jab the X-ray thing into your torus." And so that's the shape of my mouth, and so I have this certain sound that is like different from a lot of people because of that thing and because of the shape of the inside of my mouth. And I think so, going back to Connie and realizing what you internally have to offer, and so sound can also relate to like your trauma or mental upbringing or what, you know, can relate to so many different things, or you know. And so the idea of leaning into who you are is your sound. I think like one thing that she was so big on is like, let's figure out who, before we prescribe you any scales and patterns or any of this other stuff that like musicians are supposed to do, let's just like explore who you are and what you can bring to the table just as yourself, just coming right from yourself, just from the basis. Like you don't change a thing. Just let me hear you play and we'll just start right there. And that's your sound. We won't change a damn thing about it. We'll just lean so far into it that we'll perfect that because no one else will have that, you know? And I think that's what she did so well as a teacher. But it has to do with this like idea of leaning into these like capacities of what you can bring from your natural state, I think. And then leaning into that. So for me, a sound is like, let's figure out like what is your thing that's so like internally no one else can have, and then we'll just go right into that. We'll like lean more into that.
What would that look like? How would, so if a student came to you, what would that, I don't know, can you explain what that looks like?
That's a really good question. It's so complicated because it's, you want to have, I think having a basis for like the right way to breathe is important. Like there is a certain aspect of like physicality that you have to sort of adjust within yourself. But like, let's say a student comes to you and they have huge lips. Are you gonna like force them to do an over the teeth embouchure, or like should you just start that person on like a double lip embouchure because of the shape of their lips or because of how things feel for them? Like, does it hurt you to do this? Or does this hurt you to do this? Like just that kind of thing. Like what are the physical characteristics of this person? And I'm not saying we can't change any of that, but like we could consider that, you know, like if this like no name, this mystery child comes to me and is just starting saxophone, you know, like what's the dream of a sound that you would want? And maybe they say, oh, I want to like have a sparkle. Okay, I'm going to teach you how to have some very present high overtones in your sound. Like that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to teach you how to like move your soft palate in order to have that. And I'm going to start from the very beginning. That's what that could look like. Or let's say that a kid wants, you know, something more like open and dull. So like, let's work on that soft palate motion or movement or adjustment so that they can have the non-sparkle sound. I'm just like throwing out some like terms or whatever. But I would ask that question, like what do you want to sound like? You know?
You also mentioned that you were working on Countdown?
Oh yeah,
I
and
wonder how
Pablo's
that's
thing.
going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that shit is so hard. It's so
It's like,
hard.
oh,
Yeah. It's
man,
great. It's
I
so
want to work
great.
on Countdown. Man,
Yeah, I finally got it up to 100%. I mean, I just couldn't continue to sort of like go back to it and play it and try to play it again. And
are you
there's like,
writing it all? How do you
I
how
don't
are you
write the transcriptions down.
memorize it?
I really should though, I guess. I should write the stuff down because I always end up I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna write it down, and then I don't, and then I'm like, ah. But then you go back and it's funny because I was just reviewing. I transcribed lineup, Lenchtano,
Oh,
many
right,
years
yeah.
ago, like 2014 maybe or something. And recently I was going back to it, and I was like, oh man, I can't play this. But then I tried, for like a few days, and it just came back, after a few days of working on it. And it's there, it's all in there, but it just takes a second, Whereas it just takes a little more patience to get back to where it is. And instead of like, okay, well, I got the sheet, so I'll just check out the sheet again, and it's different. But like I was talking to a friend the other day about when you memorize something, it's always there. Maybe it takes a second to
Right.
get back to
I
it.
think so, yeah.
Yeah.
It's more
Well,
the process anyway of doing it.
yeah, that part, and I think there's something like really for me. Again, I'm going to talk about ancestors, but yeah, I mean, I consider John Coltrane, even though I'm not a black person and I'm not, it's not my culture of music ownership. It's not owned by my culture, but I can still really like ingest this human entity that like helped us all out, helped us figure something out about. Not, there's so much that Coltrane helped us to realize, and this way of going back and being like, I'm gonna learn this thing, is like I want that part of the ancestorship inside of me. Like I want that inside of me.
Sure.
And that's like so intimate. You know what I mean? Like doing a transcription is it's because it takes months, right?
Yeah.
It's like months of this repetition and honing and altering and shifting and being like, I can't do it, and throwing it down and then being like, all right, let me try again. It's so intimate. And so I love that whole process of having the ancestors inside of us, and we get to choose that. That's really special. It's
Yeah.
so special.
Well, that's well said.
Yeah.
Um, besides lineup
Oh
and
yeah.
countdown to insanely hard things, are there? What do you remember some of the early, like maybe easier ones that you transcribed?
I think my first transcription was a Cannibal Adderley transcription, spontaneous combustion.
Oh,
This that song.
right. What is that? Where's that from?
Man, I had like a compilation disc with that on it. Like
Okay.
I can't tell you
I'm gonna have
what
to
record
edit that
that's
out.
on, but it's
I
like
can't not know that.
it was like a piece of paper. Someone had like created some kind of compilation. It was just one piece of paper of a picture of the Adderley brothers on the front cover, and it was like spontaneous combustion, and I was like, oh. And then I learned that whole. But that was a hard one.
And that was your first one.
That was my first one, and I should have started with even something easier. But then I also remember back then, how we all sort of like do transcriptions of modern players when you were younger. But I remember really liking Antonio Hart. I did an Antonio Hart transcription earlier on, and I remember doing some like a Jackie McLean transcription early on. And then I started realizing that I like tenor players better than alto players. And so then I started Dexter Gordon was a big one for me. Sonny Rollins, like St. Thomas for sure did that transcription.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a good one.
I don't know. And then, other more modern people, Mark Turner, and there's some other musicians. Vi Red, also I transcribed a couple of her solos. She's a really amazing alto player and still alive. And then I've transcribed a lot of non-saxophone players as well. That's been sort of more of my life's work, like Herbie Hancock.
Really?
I really like Jerry Allen. I've transcribed a bit of her line. I like Carla Bley and her wackiness, and I've checked out her lines a bit and utilized them in my practice. Yeah, and then some of the other side of things, like textures of recently have been Joelle Leandra, who's a bass player who's French. She's for me, offering a world of the music that has to do with like texture. And she had, I believe, come from a practice of classical music and improvisation, and is from Europe. And so there's that world, for the world of like Evan Parker or Peter Brotzmann. Those worlds too are like really important to me.
You transcribed Evan
Yeah.
Parker? Wow.
Yeah, I mean, parts of, not like an entire solo, but like parts of, definitely.
That's
Yeah,
cool.
just and with him, there's a lot there. Usually, what I would do there is do that like up a fourth, because there's a lot to be said about the way that the saxophone is laid out with Evan Parker, like the way he plays, that has to do, you know, with the physicality of the instrument. So I would usually like do it in their key,
Right.
which is similar to like how I first learned. Like for example, I learned Body and Soul, Coleman Hawkins. I learned that in G flat first,
Oh, interesting.
before I played it in D flat. You know.
So when you were did you transcribe it, or you just learned?
I transcribed that solo.
But you learned it up.
I learned it in the tenor key because I thought it was important. At the time, I just thought it was important. I did that for a little while to just see what it would feel like.
Yeah.
To him, like what
But you're
would
playing
this
it on
feel
alto,
like?
right?
But I'm playing it on alto. But the fingerings,
Fourth
I just
away.
wanted to know
Yeah.
like what the fingerings would feel like for him, because he's doing all like
Yeah.
kind of like other fingerings, that kind of thing too, like train with like the false fingering sometimes. You know, like I think it's important. I think I did it 26 too. I was working on that for a little while, and he does a lot of like these overtone fingerings in that solo. Yeah, and I think it's important to be able to feel what it feels like. And so I was doing that for a while, and then I was like, oh, I should probably learn this in the right key. So then I learned it in D flat too.
Wow.
Well, most of the transcriptions that I really got deep into, like that first one, Came Out Utterly, I did that in all the keys, because I think that's really important. Yeah. Not sure if I'll be able to do that with the countdown.
That would be something.
Yes, it would, but I can try.
And this is just an oddball question I've thought about. Do you think the alto is harder than the tenor?
Wow, I wouldn't know. I mean, I wouldn't know.
Oh, have you?
I do play some tenor, but for me, tenor's harder.
Oh, really?
Yeah, tenor seems harder for me. I think it's because it's so interesting. Like I also sing, and the range of my voice is the same as the alto range. Isn't that crazy? Like my lowest, yeah, it's really kind of crazy. Like my lowest note is like a D flat. In the morning, it maybe could be lower, like a D or C sharp or C. But that D flat is like my low, like my serious D flat or E, or D, like D or D flat or E flat. Those are like my lowest singing notes. And then to get up into the A flat, that concert A flat up there, that's getting up there for me singing. So I just always thought, well, this was made for me. So rude.
Oh, that's interesting.
But yeah, no, I thought that. And so for me, tenor, I've always just like struggled with the sound, and like also it's so heavy. So lazy. Yeah, like I just like, this is so heavy and I don't want to deal with this. But no, I don't know. Do you think tenor's easier than alto?
I don't want to say that, but like, because the tenor can play the same notes, technically, the range, as the alto, but it has the extended lower register. I don't know.
You think the upper register on the alto is like too, like you really have to kind of finesse it to not make it be so annoying, right?
I guess so. Yeah, maybe
there's a lot more.
And you have to live up there, like you have to, and be comfortable up there.
There are a lot more annoying alto players than there are tenor players.
You heard it here first.
If there's one thing that you could learn in life, everyone, is please do not contribute to the community of annoying alto saxophone players. No, I'm just kidding. It's fine. If you want to, I mean, people can be annoying alto. That's valid too. Being like having that kind of like brash sound, like that's a vibe, you know? And you could lean into that. That's the Connie, just leaning into that and being that person. I think that's beautiful. Yeah. That's beautiful. Anyone who just leans into just doing their thing, I respect.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about singing. It seems to be pretty important to your whole thing. When did you start singing? How did this When did that happen for you?
I think I started singing like when I was a baby,
Well,
like everybody. But no,
yeah.
when I started really, practicing and stuff like that. When I lived in Chicago, I was going through a divorce and I was having a hard time. And so I started writing songs, about that and like the experience of going through that experience that that pushed me into being more of a songwriter. Or it pushed me into even like going into that world. Started writing songs and then I was like, oh, I should sing. And then I realized I wasn't that great. So I took some lessons. Luckily, was living with a really amazing vocalist whose name is Leslie Bugelman and who lives in Chicago. And she taught me a hell of a lot about health and everything. And I was friends with a lot of vocalists as well. Bethany Hamilton, she's a really incredible singer um, who moved to France now. I had to talk to her about a lot of things and it's just kind of like talking to people and being like, hey, could you help me out with it? Just friends and getting some lessons from, I used to play at this, I used to sub for a friend at this gospel church called Saint Sabina, and it's on the south side of Chicago. And my friend's name was John Goldman, and he had that gig every Sunday. It was like a 6-hour gig. It was a black church, but also Catholic.
Okay.
So if you can imagine, like, the energy of the black church, but then there's also like Catholicism. So there's there's ritualistic practice, and so anyway, the services would be that long and you'd just be sitting around for a lot of it. And I would just I got some lessons from those singers in that choir and they taught me how to belt, for better or worse. And so I wasn't really ever afraid of it because they were like, no, just do that. And so I wasn't necessarily.
That's interesting.
But yeah, I've gotten better. I can hear that in my thing.
You have a great voice.
Thanks. Yeah, I've listened back to recordings and I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely better than that. But yeah, there's still, man, I think singing is the hardest instrument of them all, which is so crazy because singers are given the most shit out of all of the musicians, So like people give singers a lot of shit. But that's like the hardest one.
For sure.
It's like the body, you can't control, you can't see it, you can't fix it,
There's no keys.
There's no keys. No. You're just like out there, you don't know, like if you don't have perfect pitch, then how do you know like what you're singing and after years of practice, then you start to learn like, okay, that's an A, it took me years and I feel like we should like ease up on singers a bit here in our industry,
Yeah. I wonder, could I ask you just to play? I'd love to just hear your sound. You have such a sweet, wonderful sound.
Thanks.
Could you play something for us?
Yeah, I'm done. Maybe I'll play A Flower Is a Lovesome Thing.
Oh, yeah. I love that song.
Billy Strayhorn.
Whew, that's so pretty. Wow, thank you.
Yeah. just a simple melody.
Kind of, what does practicing look like for you?
Yeah.
Like, how do you break down your practice?
Sometimes I'll just play. It depends the mood I'm in, but most of the time recently it's been pretty like organized, in blocks of like, depends on how I'm feeling. So my goal is like 20-minute blocks. So I'm doing the same thing for 20 minutes. And my ultimate, if I'm feeling really good, it would be like, I would do 8 20-minute blocks. Yeah, that's what I would, if I was feeling really good, that would be like 2 hours and 40 minutes. Yeah. 6, because there's, yeah. So yeah, that would be 2 hours and 40 minutes would be like, if I was home, that would be a goal to do that. 8 of those. And so one of them is definitely long tones. Gotta do it. It's just like, for me, it's like stretching or doing yoga or anything that's gonna make my body feel good. Or it's like there's a lot of physicality that goes into that. And like I have this open mouthpiece and I play on like 3.5s, so it's hard.
Just for
we
know. Like,
it's just like a Van Doren A8, and then these V16 3.5s.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I went over there to get the reeds at the Van Doren place, and they're like, "You're like the only one who plays 3.5. There's like only a few of us or something." I'm like, "Really? I don't know. There's got to be more of us out there." I don't know. Should I I asked him too. I'm like, "Should I change the reed size? Like whatever you want to do." I'm like, "Okay, you're making me feel," but no, it's fine. But anyway, so I definitely have to do the long tones a lot, which is much to the chagrin of my partner. I'm like, "Could you just not be around when I do?" Because it's so loud.
When you say long tones, what is that? Just playing like, what is that? What is it?
Yeah, so every day that I do long tones, sometimes I'll get stuck in I'll do like a shape. And I mean, a lot of this had been influenced by the ways in which musicians through the history of time have been looking at like the pitch map of the clock. Like when you study atonal music theory or whatever, and you see like 0 is like, to make a row. It's like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 back. And there's 12 notes, in our system. Well, I mean, there's definitely more notes than that, but like if we're just, the basic. But anyway, so I'll just come up with a shape, and that means like a pitch set, and then I'll move that around. And lately I've been doing like going up in major thirds, and so I'll do the 4 groupings of that. And so
just holding a tone.
So exactly. And every day I'll decide on what I'm doing. So maybe it's like I'm going into my like triple forte mode, but some days I'm like doing long tones at P inissimo, like I'm working on the long tone there. Or some days it's a crescendo through those. Or it could be like, what does a crescendo from mezzo piano to mezzo forte sound like? What does that feel like? Just so I know what that feels like to me, which is like such a personal thing. So like I'll, maybe the pitch grouping for me is like 1, on the clock. It's like I'm starting at 0, and then I go all the way around back to 1. So does that make sense?
I think so. You're talking about, so you're going chromatically?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it would be like I'm starting at 0, and then I go all around the clock and then to 1. So the interval group, I'll just do the simple one, which is. That would be that interval group. And then if I go back to 6, it would be. That shape or whatever. And then I'll just do that usually with a metronome. I like deal with it with a metronome. So I'm doing everything at the same length. And then I take that up a major third. So yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Just to make sure I'm clear. So you're doing 1, 6. That's the interval grouping.
Oh, so the interval. Well, to me, it's
Is
like
that
a
what you're
shape on the
thinking?
clock. Yeah, so it's like I'm starting it. If concert D flat is like my 0, then I'm going all the way around. So I'm back to D flat, but then I go 1 up, which is like a half. It's really a half step, but I went around 1
Okay.
octave. So
Okay, all right.
you know what I'm saying?
I think so.
Yeah. So if you don't care about octaves, then you just go 1 over.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you go back to 6.
Okay.
So, which is from 0 to 6 is a tritone. You know.
Right.
So it's like so I'm thinking about it like that instead of thinking about minor. What is it? What is the interval? Minor ninth, and then tritone. Like I guess you could think about it that way too if you want to. But I try not to use the interval names. I guess because to me, to think about it as a shape or a visual is more helpful to me for improvising.
Oh, that's
It
interesting.
gets me unstuck from labels. Like for example, I've been trying to get out of the labels of chord changes, which is something that's been a practice of mine for like the past couple years. Just being like, how do I get out of the idea of C major 7? Like I know we all know what that is, or many of us know what that is. But what does it feel like to be like inside of that, outside of that, around that, within that, through that? Like what are all of those? I know that's like very abstract, but like what even does a chord change mean anymore? What is it doing for us as a vehicle? And for me, it makes me feel a little bit stuck. So I'm trying to get out of that a bit. Yeah, this way of looking at things on the clock, or the visualization, or even you could do that with rhythms too. I did this oscillation series where I was like looking at these different polyrhythms, or whatever you want to call them, polypulses, and looking at them as like a series of dots. So you put like the dots on top of each other where they line up and when they misalign, so you can see like the pattern of where they're so as a monophonic instrument player, it's very nice for me to see where they will like line up and display from each other. So like dun, 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 dun,
Okay.
dun, 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 and so you can see where the dots dun, 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 dun.
And you write this out?
Yeah, I write it out in like Excel with dots. I literally like
Oh,
I put it in that video series, like in the top corner, in these like little panels with dots on them, and like where the dots line up is green, and when they don't line up, it's red. And like that comes from like the notation of like African music. I mean, it's been around for it. I didn't really make it up. It's like I think ethnomusicologists used to use that in order to show people how drum beats were moving, because there's no idea of like there's no one whatever in that music, or in other forms of music also. And so to write it out as a visual is like more helpful. So I've been trying to get out. Also been trying to just get out of the idea of traditional notation, and those things are helping me. So yeah, then I'll just think about what that shape feels like to me, and then I'll try to like envision that shape in order to get to the next key, which is up a major third. Going to the next key, or feeling it, instead of being like, okay, F, G, thinking about the notes themselves. Okay. So I'm thinking more about the feeling of what it feels like to move up there, to move up to that space, so that it can translate better to when I'm improvising. Instead of being like, okay, up a major third, then a minor ninth, and down a tritone, instead of that. Different way of
I like that.
like looking at it. So yeah, and then you go there, and it's like that. What does that feel like? Or anyways, it's like it's a simple idea, but I'm just trying to think about it in a slightly different way. So that's just one block.
Oh, what are some of the other blocks?
So then I'll take that same, I'll take that same shape, and then I'll apply it to like whatever. I like to work on these like monophonic polypulses. So right now I'm working a lot on feeling 3, but like 5 and 4 all together, 3, 5, and 4, and what that feels like. So let's just say I'll take that one. So that's if I'm feeling 3, 1, 2, 3. Or I could just keep the 3 in the bottom note. So that's that's like the polypulse. That's the rhythm. That's the polyrhythm.
Right.
That's like
okay.
arising from all of those pulses
Right.
together.
Yeah.
But if I just want to
The
put
composite.
the
rhythm.
composite. So
Yeah.
if I want to put them each in their own individual voice, then I would. That's it. So. Dun, dig it, dun, 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 dun. Like that.
That's so cool.
So yeah, so that's like one way that I could take the same information and apply it to something different. You know.
I love that.
Anyway, so I would do that, and then I would take that idea. So that's 40 minutes of practicing, and then I would take that idea and apply it to like a tune, or I would just improvise freely. I would improvise freely within that structure. So like maybe I'll play it on a blues, and I'll like try to incorporate that idea into the blues in some way.
I can see how really open it would. Just even being in that headspace opens things up where you're not as like, I don't know, confined or something.
Yeah.
You're already thinking about it from this direction or something.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, and then the other, like, let's see, it's 3 out of 8. So the other 5 areas of the practice, one of them is like completely free improvising 1 20-minute segment. So I'm like really just dealing with my thing for that day. And how do I feel? Like sometimes it's really angry, and I'm just exploring that texture on the saxophone. Or sometimes I'm feeling like my breath isn't working very well, so I'm working for 20 minutes. I'll work on my breathing, or I'll work on some kind of thing that has to do with like breath support. Another thing I like to do is envision a really scary situation and work on my breathing that way, because I feel like our breath changes when we're in front of crowds, in front of people that we don't feel safe in front of, and so that's been more rough for me. It's hard.
I heard somebody to replicate that kind of energy, they would run up and down a flight of stairs and then try to practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a rate up like that.
Definitely, there's a music therapist who works a lot within the idea of performance anxiety, and he with his private students, he has them do calisthenic exercises, like he has them doing exercises and then playing their most hard passages. Like that's a method of practice, and I really believe strongly if you really struggle with performance anxiety. For me, I just, in terms of like environments where you don't feel safe, so an environment that could be is like you're in a venue and the sound person's not to like come down hard on sound people, but like maybe the sound person is being really mean. How's that going to affect your thing? And for me, I'm an empath, so I pick up on everyone's energies and I put them inside me, and so I have to work really hard. Like I just have to work really hard at not taking that in. So that's one of my strategies. And then so then there's 3 left.
Sorry, just to So like, how would you unintentionally kind of put yourself in a bad mood a little bit?
I'll intentionally just envision a situation, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just intentionally visit a situation and try to be as focused. It's really hard. I think it's the hardest practice that I've had. And I mean, probably people would just be like, why do you do that to yourself? But it's because I struggle personally, this kind of a person, an empath, and I struggle with, like, I've always struggled with that. So I have to learn and practice, just like everything else, not taking other people's energies. So, and it gets better. I'll tell you that. It really does get better when you, just like anything else. Yeah, and then like the rest of the other 3 blocks for me are, so one of the blocks is like extended techniques. So I'm trying to expand my repertoire of multiphonics at the moment. I'm trying to get better at circular breathing. That's another 20 minutes of my time. Like those 2. And then one more block would be, because I really love playing tunes, but like playing over changes and trying to feel the change movements in a way that won't make me feel just like, okay, C major 7, F7. Like, it's like I'm just trying to find a way to, like, I'm still working on it. Like, so I'm trying to find a way to get it so that it feels so natural that it's not so, just like da 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 da.
When does the countdown come in?
Oh my.
So you were in the high school jazz band and stuff like that?
Yeah. And then I went to Litchfield, and which we were talking about earlier.
And that was in high school?
No, right whenever I was first going to college.
Oh, okay.
And my friend Danny McConan, who's a wonderful artist, saxophonist, band leader who lives in Boston still, in the Boston area. They told me about Litchfield, and I went because they told me. And then I was an RA and met all these amazing people. Jimmy Green and Mario Pavone and Don Braden and Claire Daly and there's Mike DeRubo, Chris Allen. Yeah, did I say Jimmy Green? David Berkman. There's just so many people who were so influential. Dave Santoro, John Benitez. Yeah, wow, there's so many incredible ones. It was really a special place. And then the students.
I mean, I find it really fascinating that you weren't majoring in jazz saxophone or something in college, which that's just incredible. Like, I don't know, I don't know how you did it actually. And you've found a way to combine your academic study with now your artistic output.
Yeah, I love science so much. It's so cool.
Yeah.
It's really fun. And I had my teachers through my undergraduate education, they were so into music. Like the lab I worked in in college, the first lab I worked in, the director of that lab was a huge jazz fan. And he was like, you could like do both of these things. And I was like, oh. And his name was Ira Bernstein, and I'll never forget. And he gave me Herman von Helmholtz On the Sensations of Tone, which is like one of the hardest books I've ever read. And he's like, read this. And I'm like, 19 years old. And I'm like, okay. And then, music cognition, cognitive science and music. Okay, cool. And then, let's go get a PhD in that. And then move to Chicago.
Wow.
So, yeah, doing that.
You did your undergrad in Texas. Did you also do grad school?
I didn't have a master's degree. I just applied. I applied to a few different programs, OSU, and I also applied to University of San Diego, UCSD, because Diana Deutsch, who was like one of the mothers of music cognition, was working there, and I was like, I want to work there, but I didn't get into that school. And then University of Connecticut at Storrs, which was this researcher, Roger Chaffin, who's not there anymore, but he was studying like cognition and performance and through practice with a cellist, and I was like interested in that program. But then I ended up going to Northwestern because they offered me this PhD position.
That's amazing.
And they were like, oh, you don't have a master's, that's fine. Just tack on another year of coursework. So I did 3 years of coursework and wrote my dissertation for 3 or 2.5. Yeah.
Wow. Were you taking lessons at all in Chicago?
Definitely.
I know you mentioned Von Freeman.
Yeah, I went down to that session a whole lot. Yeah. I was trying to hang out with a bunch of different jazz musicians and like going and seeing. I mean, even during that time, I was going to see Von Freeman, Fred Anderson, Ken Vandermark, who was playing with like Robert Berry, played in Sun Ra's band like earlier on. Like just the people who had been, Phil Coron, who played in Sun Ra's band. A lot of people who played in Sun Ra's band, Phil Coron built his own instruments. He had this gig at this Ethiopian restaurant every week, and I was like, where'd you get this harp? He's like, I built it. It's tuned to the resonance of the earth. Just like people like that, Yes. This is so crazy. Or, Julie Wood, the saxophone player, Joan Hickey. Just trying to think about other people who influenced me, and Ron Perillo, Dennis Carroll. Dennis Carroll was a huge influence on me. Bobby Broom, I took lessons with. John Wojciechowski, I took lessons. Oh yeah. Took lessons with Joan Hickey, maybe a few lessons with her. But John Wojciechowski, I was like, can I take lessons from you? And he's like, lessons? You can teach me He was just so, like whatever. But I was like, yeah, can we just actually do this? Or Jeff Bradfield, another person.
Who was teaching at Northwestern?
At the time when I was there, Joel Spencer was there.
Oh, drummer, right?
Joel, huh?
Isn't he a drummer?
Joel Spencer.
Yeah.
Yeah. He
Okay.
drummer is that
Right.
he's a drummer, right? Joel Spencer and Joan Hickey was teaching there. Dennis Carroll was teaching there. John Wojciechowski was teaching there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Bobby Broom was getting a master's degree there, and
Oh.
yeah, actually, I was like, oh, I'll take a class in the jazz department. I was just like, wow, I can take any class I want. So I took a conducting class with Bobby. That was fun, and we got to know each other really well. And yeah,
There's an album of his I couldn't stop listening to for a long time with Dennis Carroll and Dana Hall, and they played that tune "Can't Take My Eyes Off You."
oh
and
yeah,
I
with
think
Bobby.
and I think I even may have heard him play it live once.
He has a great version. I mean, he had
Such
really
a
good
great
arrangements.
Yeah, that's right.
Of tunes. Yeah, I used to go and see him play every single week at Pete Miller's, which
Pete
was
Miller's,
a steakhouse. Yeah.
Yeah.
At that steakhouse, I used to go there all the time because it was like I could walk there.
Yeah.
And
Oh
like,
man,
this is like the best
amazing.
music I've ever heard. You know,
Yeah.
just I mean, Texas was great, but then there was this whole world.
Yeah.
That I'm so happy that I was there because wow. And then Ron Perlow had that gig too. On that, and then also Ted Sirota, I met him there. He's amazing drummer. He's still very active, and Ted was cool. I love his records because he's like very outspoken, and he was like talking a lot about social justice and like talking about Fred Hamilton and all these people who had been killed at the hands of the FBI, like Black Panthers and stuff like this, or George Jackson, and people who I didn't know about. I learned a lot of that stuff from him. Yeah.
Can we talk about Keith LaMar? And,
Oh yeah.
Like what? How have you got to know him, and can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So in the pandemic, one of my other things that I wanted to do always was to be in touch with incarcerated people. So also my uncle had been in prison for a long time in Sweden. And so we had it in our family, this idea of a person who's incarcerated and this narrative that they are not worthy. And so I always thought like, wow, how unfair, because they did something wrong and they were caught and now their lives just like don't matter. So I always thought, well, I want to be in touch with people who have that placed upon them. So I started to write. I just like kind of randomly started choosing people who've been in prison for decades. I found a couple of people, Black Panther, political prisoners. So I was writing to them. Luckily, some of those people have been released. One of them, Jalil Muntakim, was released from prison in 2020, and was in prison for decades. And so then I was posting a bunch about this. I was like kind of trying to get people involved, and then someone got in touch. This record label called Die Jim Crow Records, which is very still active. They go into prisons and record incarcerated people and put albums out from the inside to the outside, which is so beautiful. All kinds of music.
Yeah.
And they were
they're recording music, not just interviews. Or...
Yeah.
Oh,
They'll go into these institutions, and sometimes they'll bring musicians. I know Kevin Hayes also gets involved with them. He's gone, and he'll be like accompanying like a singer inside, and they'll like take their tape recorder and they'll record their whole setup, which is beautiful. And they were like trying to raise money, so they saw that I was like posting about it, and they're like, do you want to play like our fundraiser? It's on Zoom. And I'm like, yeah, hell yeah. So I did that, and then I was posting about that, and then someone else asked me to do an event where I like donated a set. I'd like to record myself. Could you donate this for our thing? Same kind of thing, like an organization dedicated to abolitionist movement, the prison abolition movement. And then so I posted that, and then a friend of a friend was like, hey, we're doing this event for Keith LaMar, who's this person who's incarcerated for a crime he didn't commit. Like, he wrote this book. Check it out. And do you want to play at the concert in Grand Armory Plaza? It's like, there's gonna be like 30 people there. Do you want to do it? And I'm like, yeah. What else am I doing? Pandemic. So we all did that, and then I was like, oh, Keith LaMar, and I started reading about him, and played a couple other concerts, and finally we started talking. Phone calls and emails and video chats or video exchange on JPay, which is like the system that they use through prisons, which you have to pay for. And anyway, so we became friends, and now he's like one of my closest friends.
Wow.
He's one of my closest friends. And his execution date, unfortunately, is set for this year in November. And we're really trying. He has a whole team of lawyers. There's a whole team of people working. There's a really wonderful podcast that just came out, and it's coming out in single episodes, called The Real Killer Podcast. It's a podcast, it's series, and this month and next month is dedicated to Keith LaMar and his whole story. And I really recommend it because they're doing such a good job of like really outlining who is Keith LaMar, what's his history, why was he in jail for the first place, and then he was in jail for a crime, like a murder charge, which he served that time, and then he was transferred to a different prison, Lucasville, which there was a riot at, and then he was accused of being one of the orchestrators of that riot, even though he was not involved with that. So you can read the book. It's called Condemned, and this podcast is really good. And yeah, really trying, you know, it's coming down to the wire, and I just think he's one of the most intelligent people. He's like one of the most intelligent people to deal with something like this and be in prison for these decades since he was 19. You know, he's in his 50s. So it's just miraculous that someone can have. I mean, I've been to the Ohio State Penitentiary. I'm going again this month. Yes, I'm going again later this month to visit him again. And it's just horrible. Like he's, you know, always in chains the whole time, and he's like chained to a table. His legs are chained to a table, and they're also chained to themselves. Like he has feet chained to each other, and recently he went on a hunger strike because they took away his privileges for wearing jewelry. It just so happened to happen at the same time that this podcast came out. It's like I'm not saying that anyone's a bad person, you know, the way that people are treated. I believe regardless of what you've done, like you deserve to be treated like a human being. Whatever you did.
You're more than the worst thing that you've ever done in your life.
Yeah. And people deserve forgiveness too. I think forgiveness is like overrated. Sorry, underrated. Forgiveness is underrated. We don't forgive enough. Yeah. And you know, it's hard because when you've been done wrong, you know, you don't want to try again. But I believe in his case, and I'm going to try my best to keep this moving.
How do you define success for yourself?
I think it goes back to that idea of learning, like we were talking about before. Like, if I can learn one new thing a day, that's pretty successful, you know. I think that's successful. And I think for me, patience has always been like a hardship, and just forgiveness for that. Forgiveness for being impatient.
Forgiveness to like yourself.
Myself, being forgiving to myself, and being gentle with myself, and being like, why am, you know, because all of us are like, why am I not getting that gig, or why am I not on this, or why am I, you know, because you go on social media and people are listing like all the, I know I'm guilty of it too, but just like listing all their tour dates, and you're like, you know, and then you start feeling this weirdness about yourself, and you're like, well, so in learning how to compare within my life, like instead of others, that's such a hard one. It's like, you know, if you start, that's a tricky, tenuous space to be in when you're comparing yourself to others. But if you compare only within where your life has been, like, okay, you know, and then again, just being, the patience thing, like being patient within the striving, because I think over striving for myself can feel a little too like capitalistic in some ways, like what's the next step, or like what's the next hustle, or whatever. And that to me is not what it's about. It's about the music, you know. It's about learning countdown and being like, oh shit, I can't play this, and like this man, you know, figured out these chord changes in this melody, and it's so beautiful. Invented them, and hey, that's humbling, and let me sit my ass down and learn that. And then like I still want to be doing that later on. It's not like, okay, once you get to a certain place, like I don't have to do that anymore, or I don't know. And that's valid too if people want to do that. I don't know. But for me, the success is like, okay, I learned this thing. This got better. You know.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
A little bit, but what's on the horizon, like album wise, and gig-wise, it probably, this won't post until like a month. So,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'm working on a few different things. The first of which is this album by the band Alula, which is sort of my electronic music project where I'm like hooked up to pedals and things, and then there's more electronic components. And that was recorded a little while ago now, but it's with myself and Chris Tordini and Val Janti and Qasim Nakvi and Taishan Sori, and that is hopefully coming out early next year. And then the Portals Volume 2 is hopefully coming out in the fall of 2024, like hopeful for that. And then this album with Wendy Eisenberg, I'm hopeful that will come out this year sometime. We're talking about it, but hopefully that will.
That's so
come out.
great.
Those three. And then, yeah, I'm working on a solo album. I need to do I've been applying to residencies so I can like, I want to like actually write some specific things. I've done all these solo gigs, and there's a lot of material there, but to shape it for an album, I want it to be like a certain thing. So I'm working on that, but I need some time for that. And I'm playing at the Stone for the first time under my own residency in December. That's exciting.
That is exciting.
Yeah,
wow.
I'm really excited about
cool.
that. And yeah, I'm doing a bunch of like sort of guest artist things coming up here in Montana and Reno and Pittsburgh, and that's all. And we're going on a tour for the Keith LaMar project.
Oh wow!
Which is really exciting. In April, we're going to Ohio. Like we're going to a bunch of places. And the special thing about that is that Keith will be on tour with us. He is always there, like on the phone, performing with us.
Whoa!
It's either that if sometimes the phone line drops, which is, it's always just like, well, what's happening here? Or we have a recording of him playing. But normally what happens is that he calls in and he's like on the phone talking while we're performing around him. And that's what it's about. It's about him speaking his truth. He's written these poems and we're playing around them. And the person who's composed the music for that is Albert Marquez. He's a pianist. And the whole project is really exciting. And we tour with a bunch of different like speakers and people who've been involved with the struggle for Black Lives Matter movement, and people who've been one of the people that we work with is the cousin of Eric Garner. Jason Fulford. He's always coming in and like speaking. It's really special, the movement and how it connects with
that is really
the
amazing.
broader like shape of where we are in this country with like incarceration and racial profiling and all these other things.
Could I ask you to play? You brought in a Sun Ra tune?
Yeah, let's do it.
You want to try it?
Yeah, let's try it. Yeah.
That was so fun.
That was cool.
Is there anything we haven't covered, or any last
I think so.
last words of
Not
wisdom?
really. I would encourage everyone to be an advocate. I work on the board for this organization called This Is a Movement. And I would say, if I were to say something, I would be like, ask people to be advocates for that. This Is a Movement is a organization where the steering committee is organizing events and panel discussions, and also like working groups to, brainstorm how we can make gender equity like a bigger part of our industry, like at large. And just what we're working on now is these working groups where we have actual like calls to action. So we have like action potential. There's all these panels where we're sitting around and we're talking about all these things that are going on and like our perspectives on them. But a lot of people feel like there's no action item, and so we're trying to organize these working groups, and I've been really excited about that potential lately. So this thing is called This Is a Movement.
That's awesome. We'll put that in the link.
Yeah. I encourage anyone can be an advocate.
Amazing, right? Thank you again, Caroline, for your time, for your thoughts, and thank you. I hope to see you next time. Bye.